Welcome to our next episode of Diagnostic Guru. I'm excited to host Dr. Lena Chang. Lena is a pioneer of digital healthcare, a physician turned marketer with 20 years of leadership experience across startups and established health tech companies. She has a proven track record of scaling successful brands and defining new categories that set disruptive companies apart from the healthcare status quo. She's currently the co-founder of Best Friend Jack, a boutique marketing and branding agency serving health tech companies. We're excited to have the opportunity to speak to Lena today. Welcome, Lena.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I would love to dig in. I usually have a question that I like to ask all of my diagnostics guru, and let's start with the good. So, what is one of the things that you are most proud of in your career to date?
Well, that by far has to be the transition that I made from leaving clinical medicine and moving into industry. It was such a hard decision to do that and to take that step. It was very scary, but it taught me so much about myself and what I wanted out of my life and my career. That by far really has been the thing that I've been most proud of.
Yeah, I that's incredible to hear because that's one of the reasons why I actually reached out to you is because you were able to make that pivot or that transition in two almost completely different sides of the company or the spectrum and line of thinking. What was that decision process like? And when you decided to make the transition from medicine into marketing?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot because it's so unusual to see a physician who moved over into marketing. And the short version is I went into medicine because it felt like the natural thing to do. I grew up around hospitals. My mom was a labor and delivery nurse, and then later she became a midwife. And so the whole world of healthcare really felt very familiar to me. And so from a pretty young age, I was saying, I want to be a doctor. And once that idea took hold, it really just kind of stuck. So I followed the path all the way through, right? I got the degree and finished my residency. I practiced for a short while. And from the outside, it looked like I had everything kind of lined up, but truly inside, I felt really restless, like something just didn't fit. I did know that I loved certain parts of medicine, getting to know patients, understanding their stories, working on teams, but that day-to-day work of being a doctor just didn't light me up on the inside. And so at first I really didn't know what to do with that feeling because when your whole identity has been wrapped up in being a doctor, and let's be honest, there's a lot of cultural prestige around it, right? It's hard to say, it's very hard to say, like, actually, I don't think this is right for me. But eventually, though, that restlessness in my head just became loud enough that I couldn't ignore it. And through the work of some executive coaches that I worked with, I really realized that the thing I was craving was creativity. I wanted to tell stories, I wanted to build things, I wanted to help people see that bigger picture and not just one patient at a time, but at a system level. And so through that, that led me into healthcare marketing and eventually, um, for the past 6 years, that 6 years ago was when my business partner and I co-founded Best Friend Jack, which is our marketing agency. And what's interesting is that the things that I did love about medicine, things like understanding people's motivations, making sense of complexity, translating a lot of that clinical and technical language into something human. Um, those are the skills that I use every day now. So the way that I tend to look at it is, yes, I left clinical medicine, but I really expanded my definition of how I could contribute to healthcare.
I think the bottom line, if anyone's listening, those that are listening today, is listen to that instinct inside of you. What makes you excited every day, what gets you out of bed and where you want to be because you truly want to love what you're doing. And it sounds like that's what you're doing today around your business. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Like what made you wanted to finally go out on your own and start your own business, Best Friend Jack?
Well, I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, the idea for Best Friend Jack came from wanting to solve a problem that my business partner and I were having in our own work. So, Reed, my business partner, we met initially while working at a large healthcare advertising agency. We were doing creative work for big pharma and biotech clients. These were multi-million dollar accounts with global campaigns and massive teams, the whole nine yards. And it was this incredible training ground, right? We saw what great strategy and creative execution looked like, but at the same time, we also saw just how much overhead these agencies have to carry and how inaccessible that model is for earlier stage companies. So later, when we moved from biotech and pharma and advertising to work at health tech startups. And we suddenly found ourselves on the client side of the business. And we were looking around for agency partners who understood that startup environment. But what we found was, it was either felt too junior, right? It was like a one person freelancer or a pretty small team, or it was way too big, right? Sort of that big agency model. And those big agencies had those price points that really made zero sense for an early stage company that's trying to move fast, trying to stay lean. So in the course of our work together, Reed and I had one of those what if moments. What if we built the kind of agency we needed when we were in house, one that specialized in the kinds of things that we really loved to do, which is branding, content marketing, fractional chief marketing officer support, but for health tech startups. And so we could bring in that senior level thinking without all the overhead and the red tape. So that was 6 years ago. Neither of us had started a business before, and it was definitely scary, but we always told ourselves that we could always go back to in-house roles if it didn't work out. But, ultimately we believed in the idea. And what was such a pleasant surprise for us was we found out that there was a real appetite for what we were offering, this sort of partner-led nimble agency that gets that startup space and can sort of adapt as companies grow. And honestly, it's been, just such an amazing and rewarding decision.
Well, with that, maybe you could also touch a little bit about just being a woman leader in these types of examples, building your own company, and what were some of the biggest challenges as a woman, being a leader in science today, either your previous work or, your current work today with Best Friend Jack.
What I've really learned over the years and what I see for women leaders in science and really in any high skill of high stakes field is this myth of linear success.
Mm.
I think unfortunately we're still operating in systems that reward the the straight linear path, right? Get the degrees, climb the ladder, check off all the boxes, and don't step off track. And really, that model just doesn't reflect how many women's lives actually unfold, right? I know that that was true for me. I spent years pursuing medicine because I thought it was the right path. I think I was good at it. But once I got there, I realized that it wasn't the right fit. And it took me such a long time to get the courage to step away. But after I did, um, it was a relief in some regards, but also it felt incredibly destabilizing, right? I had internalized that detours meant failure, that questioning the path meant some level of weakness. And that's really that's the message that society was sending me. And also, frankly, I would say 99% of the people around me, whether it was friends or colleagues, peers, people were concerned for me. They thought I would be committing, career suicide if I left, and all of this. It was hard to have those external voices in my head. And what I've learned since, both personally and through my work with other women leaders, is that nonlinear careers can be incredibly rich and powerful. So women might step out of clinical practice or take a detour into entrepreneurship, or maybe they shift from the bench to a more strategic role. And those choices shouldn't be seen as stepping off the path. Really, I think they are the path.
Mhm.
And so if we want to support women in science who are navigating these nonlinear journeys, I think there's a few things that we need to do. The first is to stop equating time away or equating career pivots with a lack of ambition. That's probably number one. I would love to see people ask different and better questions like, what are you excited to build next? Instead of why did you leave? Why did you step off the path? And ideally, we would create space for reentry, reinvention, and especially for women in midlife, right? I'm 52, and what I see a lot around me is women who bring deep experience, sort of in their at this age, like 50s, maybe 60s, maybe beyond. So they bring deep experience, but they're often overlooked.
Mhm.
And in an ideal world, I'd love to see us celebrate the women who are charting their own course, really not in spite of the detours, but because of them, and to see that those detours really bring a lot of value to what they can bring to different companies or work environments.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. Like I got a little emotional hearing you say that about the linear path because that's kind of how I felt like, okay, I have to do this. Then I got to, okay, I went to grad school, then I got to do a fellowship, and then I got to, and then I hit the top and I was like, now what? I don't, and that's when I started to kind of like explore other areas. But what I find challenging is did you ever get to a space where people like you're in your new world, okay? You're in marketing, you're doing your thing, and people stopped trying to pull you back to where they think you should be or where you came from? Because that's kind of the challenge I kind of
Oh
find,
gosh. Yeah, that's such a great question. I would say after I left clinical medicine, that happened for years. I always, I mean, for a good, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, I kept on getting that question. Oh, so do you think you'll ever go back to clinical practice? Is that something you would do again? And certainly, for my parents, for example, right, they're immigrants. I mean, it was so hard for them to understand the this new path that I was carving out for myself. I think they were in denial about it for a good, I don't know, 10 years or something. But that's where I feel like, to get so clear in your head why you are leaving, why you are taking a different path is so important, because otherwise it's too easy to give in to some of those external pressures. But yeah, I mean, for a long time, people struggled with it. I would say I've never fit into a box. And I think folks, especially like in HR or recruiting, definitely never, they couldn't process my resume.
yeah.
And so when it came to finding my next role, I've never matched up to a job description. I've always had to take kind of a non-traditional path to getting my next job.
It's too bad that we get so caught up on checking the box, and looking at resumes and trying to pigeonhole people into maybe a square peg when really they're round, in these
It's
scenarios.
hard, right? And I
Yeah.
think most of us in general, I mean, frankly, even some people in HR, right, are not great at reading resumes and understanding where someone could shine. And I get it, right? Resumes are just so kind of inert in a way. And so that's why I just learned from early on, as I struggled. I mean, I have to say that first transition, or that transition that I took in going from clinical medicine into my first role in biotech, that was very hard. I didn't know anything about marketing or drug development. And there was no way that I could rely on my resume to get me that job. It really took a lot of networking and informational interviews to land at the right place and to finally come across a hiring manager who could actually see through the way that not just what was on my resume, but the way I was interacting with this person, the drive that I was showing, the ambition that I displayed, that I would be a good fit for what he was looking to fill at the time. But yeah, it's an imperfect system.
For sure, but it's nice to that maybe that's one of your goods that we could talk about into the next question is the people that you were obviously surrounded with that helped you along that journey. So with that, maybe during your career, could we touch upon one good, one bad, and one ugly?
The way that I would think about sort of like the good, the bad, and the ugly in my career is thinking about it through the lens of our clients, because we've learned so much about how to build a successful business by having a point of view on the types of companies that we work with, the type of people, the main points of contact that we end up working with. It's really helped us to grow as leaders, as business owners. So for the good, the best clients that we've worked with are the ones who understand that the brand work that we do, for example, is a strategic growth driver. It's not just a logo refresh or a new tagline or a new color palette. They're looking for a long-term partnership. They want an agency that can carry institutional knowledge, be aligned with their values, and bring a strategic lens to like the positioning and the messaging and the content work that we do. They're also well capitalized enough to actually invest in building that foundation. And when that alignment is there, the work really flows, the relationship grows, and that's where we can really help that company, make an impact in the world. So the, having a point of view on that, has taken us years to sort of build that up. But because we know now sort of what types of clients, to look for, that has really helped us. Um, we on the sort of the bad side, we've also worked with clients who were really just looking for something surface level, and nothing wrong with that, but it's just not what we do. It's not where we can help companies shine.
Mhm.
It's, if they're just looking for slightly new messaging or just a prettier slides or maybe like a shinier homepage, that's really, you don't want to engage an agency like ours. It's just not worth the money or the time. There are other agencies that can do that work for you. And those were the engagements that we had to say no to,
Mm.
because ultimately it was, there was no desire to really clarify positioning, to think about branding in a more strategic sense. And it just, was not the right fit. And so we learned to say no to that over time. On the ugly side, I'd say, you know, in the first couple of years of our business, we took on projects where, it was clear almost within the first couple of weeks that it wasn't the right fit. And this makes me think about one CEO in particular who just was, I think, a little bit paralyzed by decision making in general. He didn't trust our recommendations. He really micromanaged every detail. And this part still makes me laugh. Like, he brought in a family member to weigh in on the branding. The project dragged on for months. And because we had scoped it at the time as this sort of flat fee engagement, we weren't being paid for all the extra time. And I mean, it was so painful, but it really taught us so much about, well, let's, use this as a way to shape the type of work that we say, that we say yes to.
I mean, I'm a big believer that everything in life happens for a reason, or there's, some sort of bigger meaning or concept behind it. So sometimes you have to go through the ugly, I guess, to get to the good in that story. And it's hard working with founders. I know all too well, they're their babies, they're really controlling, so sometimes even though you know what you're saying is the right path or the right direction to do, they just don't want to hear it. And so it's more shame on them and kudos to you and what your team's doing on staying with that path and not bending back because that's what they want.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean, we come across so many different founder types, and the ones that we perk up right away when we meet founders who have a strong point of view, they have a vision for the company, they're true leaders, but at the same time, they understand that they can't know everything and that they know how to bring in the right expertise to help them make clear decisions about what to invest in and what not to invest in. And so we love folks like that. We struggle with the ones that I think perhaps have a little bit of less experience and uh, have this sense that they need to be involved with everything. That is when it becomes hard.
So is that for a recent post that you put on LinkedIn that I found really interesting, a statement that you made, the best messaging doesn't lead with features, it leads with pain. Does this come from some of this experience of what you're talking about right now? Could you explain a little bit more behind that?
Yeah, sure. So that post definitely struck a chord. It's something that we see all the time at our agency. So whenever we start working with a new client in health tech, the first thing we look at is their existing messaging on their website and pitch decks, on through sales enablement materials, all of it. And frequently what we see is that it's full of features, a lot of bullet points, a lot of like, hey, here's what our product does, here's how it works, here's our AI, here's our dashboard. And to some extent, like that's totally understandable, right? These founders and teams, they're proud of what they built. That's the way they tend to think about their offerings.
Hmm.
The challenge is it's all from their point of view. So one of the first things we do is we try to flip that around. We help them look at it from the buyer's perspective. What pain is that buyer feeling? What friction are they dealing with day to day? What's not working in their world? And then we position the features as the solution to all those pain points.
Mm.
We show why those features matter in their world and in the context of something that the buyer really cares about. The other thing we try to do is we try to say it in plain language. It's funny because some marketers, I think, tend to think of direct to consumer as very different from, B2B. But
Mm.
really, I mean, we're all humans at the end of the day. So we try to go into it with very little jargon, very little buzzwords, just simple, clear messaging that shows that a company really understands the problem and can solve it and make your life so much easier because of what we're offering. So that idea that leading with pain instead of features is really, it comes from wanting to build trust. Because when a buyer sees themselves and their challenges reflected in your company's messaging, they feel like you get it, right? They feel like you're on their side, that you're on their team. And that's really where the magic happens, when that can really open doors to a real conversation.
It's incredible that you're able to see that, though. I see that as like seeing the forest, not the trees in these scenarios. Really understanding what the buyer wants, and can the product fit that need? Because a lot of times it cannot. I don't know if you've ever had examples of that, but I know I have.
Yeah. Well, and that's another interesting point, is that I think companies, especially startups, also have trouble saying no. We work with a lot of companies where I think in the beginning stages, they're fearful of saying, we do this, but we don't do that. And I think sometimes they'd want to say, we do it all, because they don't want to miss out on opportunities. But it's actually from that focus and that clarity that can help you just get really good at everything, right? Not just with your product and what you do and what you solve, but also with your messaging and how you do lead gen and how you move prospects, through the funnel. It just that focus is can be very clarifying.
As one great advisor said to me, still don't remember who, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Yes, that's right. That's so true.
And so I always try to live by that.
Yeah.
Um, do you find, I want to dig a little bit into some other work that you are a part of, this How Women Invest. I'm really intrigued by this. Is also another area that I'm, looking into. And do you find, with your background, I'm sure your view and vision of investing in companies is a much different than others. And could you talk a little bit more about this program and what it's all about and what it means to you?
So I am so inspired by the work that How Women Invest does. So I am a limited partner in the fund, and that really is just a fancy way of saying that I have given money to How Women Invest to invest on my behalf. And so I've seen firsthand how Women Invest is really changing the game, not just by investing in these high growth women led startups, but by mobilizing more women to become investors themselves. And that's really their whole model. They don't just raise money from traditional institutional investors, they bring in women, many of whom are first time investors, and they give them access, education, and community to build confidence as limited partners. So it's really about shifting who holds the capital and influence, not just who receives that money. So to me, that's really where the real transformation happens, because when women are writing the checks, they're also shaping what gets built, who gets funded, and then how that success is defined. So there's really huge potential here. Women bring so much more than just money, right? They bring
Mhm.
in their diverse experience and expertise, they bring in their networks, their perspectives that are often overlooked in traditional VC circles. And we already know from the data that women-led companies tend to outperform, but they still receive a tiny fraction of VC money. So it's really, and that's just not an equity issue. It's a really missed like business opportunity. If you're a woman leader and you're curious about getting involved in this space, I always say, start where you are. You don't need a finance background, and there's How Women Invest, but there are lots of other platforms making it accessible. I've also invested in startups through the Helm. It, they're a fund and a community that makes investing in women-founded companies kind of easy to step into. There is WeFunder, which is not specifically focused on women, but they allow you to invest small amounts directly into startups that you believe in. And then there's a couple of others that folks have mentioned to me recently. One is Pipeline Angels. They've got a great angel investor training program that is designed for women and non-binary folks. And then there's Portfolio, which offers funds specifically for women who want to learn while they invest, and they focus on specific sectors like health and climate and consumer innovation. So the bottom line is like you don't have to wait to be an expert. Like I certainly wasn't when I first got involved with How Women Invest. And through being involved with that, I took that first small step and did some work also on the due diligence side, which was really interesting. And it's really, so necessary, because the more that women, engage with capital, that's really just the more inclusive and innovative our futures will be. It's just so critical.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've definitely hold some things to myself in a sense that I've worked for a lot of women-led companies, women CEOs, women founders, and try to get involved in a lot of women organizations. And I'm really interested. I'll definitely look into some of these other organizations that you talked about because it's a new frontier for me to explore, and I'm sure others who are are listening in, and it sounds like it's a nice, safe place to start if you're new to investing.
Definitely. Yeah, they make it easy.
That's fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're coming to an end here. This has been an amazing conversation with you. I've learned a lot about you, and you've given a lot of great advice for others who will be listening in. I do like to end my interview with one question. I think that all of us have some sort of superpower, whatever that may be. So, I was wondering if you could tell us what you think yours is.
My superpower is a boldness about taking chances, and I always like to think of it as I really push myself to live a big life. It really stems from that transition that I made early on in my career. It was so scary, but it taught me that I can do big, scary things.
Mm.
So I don't fear those things anymore. Not everything that I try works out, but that going through that process was so hard that it just taught me, you know what, it is hard, it can be scary, but in the end, if I just try my hardest and go into it with an open mind, I can learn so much from it and do great things.
That's great. Well, I think everything that you said today that holds true. Well, thank you so much. I think that your gut instincts holds true, and I continue to watch all the work that you're doing with Best Friend Jack, and I'm excited for others to hear your story and learn more from you. So thank you so much for your time today, Lena. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun being here.
Great.